morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody for this OECD Network of Economic Regulators and French Club des Régulateurs meeting that we use to organize jointly after or before each meeting of the Network of Economic Regulator. This meeting will be about sunshine regulation, about the implemented practices and the observable impacts of sunshine regulation. So I am Eric Brousseau, the scientific director of the chair Governance and Regulation, and I will briefly introduce this meeting. Then the meeting will be concluded by Anna Pietikainen from the OECD. During this meeting, we'll have the pleasure to listen to several experts and practitioners in regulation. In the order of appearance, Pierre Dubreuil from the French ARCEP, the regulator for electronic communication. Then we'll have Pedro Terrazas, who is a member of the Instituto Federal de Telecommunications in Mexico. Then we'll have Barbara Wyss from the Federal Electricity Commission of Switzerland. We'll also benefit from a talk by Gábor Kisvárdai from the Energy and Public Utility Regulatory Authority of Hungary. Then we'll have Jean-Laurent Lastelle, who will speak both as a French regulator of energy and as a member of the coordination of regulator at the EU level, the CEER. And then we'll have James Drummond from the OECD. So just to briefly introduce this panel, let me remind you that to balance the relationship between supply and demand, but also between incumbent firms and new entrants, or even between operators and the government, regulators can rely on the formal level of power granted by the legislator to them, but they can also rely upon the so-called tool of soft law. And most of those tools of soft law basically rely on the ideas that the asymmetry and the potential misbehavior on regulated markets are depending upon information asymmetries and sometimes of knowledge asymmetries. And the idea is that the regulator could provide the various stakeholders of regulation with information that would help to rebalance the relationship between the various stakeholders of regulated industries. Of course, the datification of activities plays a strong role there and boosts, in fact, the capability of regulators to rebalance those information asymmetries between the various stakeholders. In a recent study that we carried out at the Governance and Regulation Chair on the basis of OECD data that were kindly provided to us by the team of Anna, we try to analyze the patterns of the characteristic of the patterns of regulatory governance across OECD countries. And we found that 4 dimensions characterize a regulatory governance regime in OECD. First, and not surprisingly, the independence from the government. Second, which is something that is less common, the discretion of the regulatory authority, which also is negatively linked to the formalization of its authority. The third dimension that is very important are the set of tools that allows the regulatory authority to monitor market activities, of course, tariff, pricing, license, etc., etc. And the last characteristic that is very important to establish contrast among regulators is a transparency regime that might be implemented by the regulator through collection, gathering of data, processing of data, and provision of those data to various stakeholders, of course, to the users, but also to the operators, to the government, etc., etc. And if you think about it, the two first indicators rely to the institutional arrangement that shape the activity of regulators, and the two others rely on the channels they are relying upon to fulfill their mandate. We ran, thanks to the OECD data, a dynamic and static analysis, static comparison and dynamic comparison of all regulatory regime in more than in about 30 OECD countries in 4 industries. So in telecom, in energy, in rail, and in airports. We basically the finding, there are many findings actually, but the main findings that are interesting in the context of this debate today is that when you compare all those national and sectoral regulators across themselves, first of all, and when you compare them in static, okay, you identify a strong, you witness a strong heterogeneity of institutional arrangements across industries and across countries that both reflect the specific institutional characteristic of each country and also the diverse maturity in terms of regulatory practices across countries. Second, we've also found a strong correlation at the level of channels across channels. So to make it clearer, the market once a regulator rely on heavily on market mechanisms, he also rely heavily on transparency tools. Okay, so basically the outcome of this is that in a sense the soft law is not is complementarity to the hard law tools and not a substitute in practice. That said, of course, we also witness a high level of divergence between the various industries, typically, for instance, between the telecommunication regulators and the airport regulators, for instance. What is also interesting is to identify, to compare, in fact, those regulators in dynamic. So basically, what we did was to compare the scores each regulator got on those 4 dimensions in 2018, in the survey that was performed in 2018, with those that they got in 2013, and we compare the evolution. What we found is that there is a relative stability of institutional arrangement, while there is a growth of independence of regulatory authorities in OECD country, but let's say a smooth growth. What we also found when we focused on the channels was that there is a relative stability of market tools. So between 2018 and 2013, in fact, you didn't had a strong development of those tools for any of the regulators we studied or that were surveyed by the OECD. However, we identify a very strong development of transparency tools, and overall, in fact, transparency practices seems to have been the characteristic, even at the highest pace of evolution for all regulators in OECD, towards the more converging practices across industries and countries. We have more diversity, in fact, a higher distribution of scores when we consider other dimensions. So clearly, this focus on transparency is of course central for analyzing regulatory practices in OECD countries, but of course beyond OECD. And also it has very well been understood by the legislators and regulators. Clearly, a central approach today in regulation of digital activities, or in regulation of innovation, or in regulation of platforms rely on the ideas that transparency tools are essential. Think of sandboxes, or on the OECD recommendation on agile regulatory governance to harness innovation that has been recently published by the OECD. Think also to the DMA and DSA approach that basically request transparency from platforms in exchange of or under the threat of relying on more hard law tools. So our meeting today, I think, is right on time, and it will be very interesting to analyze and to listen to the practices of regulators across countries. Our meeting will be organized in 3 small sessions with 2 talks at each time. The first session will be focusing on data. The second session, data management, data practices, etc., etc. The second session will be focusing on the legal foundation and organizational requirements to allow soft legal tools to operate. And the third session will be about the impact of a richer informational environment on regulatory practices, on users, and on operators' behavior. And I think that what we will discuss today is fully in line with the recently published OECD regulatory policy outlook that insisted a lot on those practices of transparency in regulated industries. So let's immediately start with the first session, the first small session. So we will have two speakers. Each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes. Then we'll have 10 minutes for question and for comments from the audience. So the audience can interact with us through the question or the chat. Please, you have two type of capability of two strands of messages. Please ask questions in the question strands and make comments in the chat strand. So thank you very much, and I will immediately leave the floor to our first speaker, which is So I am lost with my papers. I will. Sorry, with Pierre Dubreuil from ARCEP, and ARCEP has been a pioneering authority in developing data-intensive transparency practices, and I guess Pierre will present this experience and the outcome of this experience that has been launched by ARCEP, and which is no longer, in a sense, an experience, right? It's a kind of regular practice nowadays. So thank you very much, Pierre, and the floor is yours for 15 minutes.
Thank you for the invitation to this event, and also thank you for giving me the privilege to start the panelist presentation. And I hope I will make good use of your attention on sunshine regulation, but what we call here at ARCEP the data-driven regulation. So as said, I come from ARCEP, which is the French Electronic Communication Regulatory Authority. It is an independent administrative authority, so it means that it is responsible for regulating the electronic communication, but also the postal and print media sectors. We regulate on behalf of the states, but entirely independent of any political power and or economic stakeholders. So ARCEP sees itself as a network architect and network guardian. As a network architect, we create the condition for a plural and decentralized network organization by defining the regulation rules that applies to all or part of the stakeholders. As a network guardian, we enforce the principles that are essential for guaranteeing user ability to communicate on these networks. At ARCEP, I'm the head of the data-driven regulation unit, a unit where there is 10 people, and you will understand better why after. And I hope that through this presentation, I will be able to show you how ARCEP uses data to better regulate in what we call the data-driven regulation. So I think it's maybe interesting to understand how we started to construct this data-driven regulation. So in 2016, ARCEP drew up a strategic review roadmap and what were the key findings at the beginning of this process. So through our experience at ARCEP and also through a study that we had commissioned, we found that there were inequality in quality of service. So one of the main triggers of the démarche was that pushed us was, let's be honest, the situation on mobile coverage that was pretty bad. That secondly, the study that we commissioned revealed that information such as quality of service or coverage were considered as key drivers for the choice of end user when choosing their internet service provider, but the user thought they were not sufficiently informed about those. And finally, consumers also expected more from regulators and for public services in common. So they wanted real data, not only simulations. And also at ARCEP, we identified that end users did not have a sufficient role in the regulatory process, that we wanted to provide them with full ability to drive competition, innovation and investment from operators and regulated actors. So to satisfy these newly identified needs on the mobile markets, we therefore decided to publish precise maps under our website called monreseaumobile.arcep.com. On this website, we allowed users to instantly look at the coverage that an ISP offers at his home, at his workplace, and quickly switch from the coverage from one ISP to the other in order to compare quality and to assess the ISP that is better for the usage of this a particular person. Beyond this theoretical coverage map, we also conducted quality of service surveys, and we published on this website the results of this real data that we measured. On the side of the problem of involving more the end users and the ecosystem in the regulation, we launched a platform called Regulators ARCEP in October 2017. This platform allows any user, whether it's an individual or business or local authority, to report a malfunction that they have encountered in their relationship with their fixed or mobile provider. This platform gives this way the opportunity of turning every user into a mini regulator serving for the common good. The common good. So the platform has two objectives. So one for user is giving them this possibility of taking part into the regulation process. And the second one is also to give ARCEP more data about what is really happening in the market and what is really happening in the networks. It is a way also for ARCEP to have a feedback on what is happening, and maybe a new way of regulation, because it's not only ARCEP giving data to consumer, but it's also the contrary. It's information coming from consumer and users, businesses, to the regulator. Matter of regulating the fixed internet quality of service, so ARCEP also choose to opt for an innovative co-construction approach. So by bringing together measurement tools, internet access providers, consumer associations, and academia to ensure that end user will have the right level of information. So if the output of this co-construction process is also interesting, it's an API, maybe I will talk about this if you want later. I think that the process itself, it's a perfect illustration of a new regulatory process involving the entire ecosystem. So data-driven regulation is first for us a rational approach built on real-world problems. But doing all that, we felt that we were really modifying the in-depth or approach to regulation. So the data-driven approach to regulation is indeed an approach based on the user empowerment and overseeing the ecosystem with RegTech tools instead of telling economic stakeholders how to behave in the old-fashioned way. So here you have a full schema of the process, but what's important is that data-driven regulation creates the ability to make stakeholders more accountable, increases also the regulator's capacity for analysis, and make more information available to users and civil society. So the main principle and definition could be that harness the power of information to understand the market and shed light on how to operate in a factual fashion to steer the market in the right direction, and also to better protect consumer on the rights. I also wanted to highlight that putting in place a data-driven regulation is a real commitment for institutions. So here at ARCEP, we have now around 10 data scientists. So that's why that's my team that I spoke at the beginning of the speech. And we entirely changed our approach with a dedicated infrastructure with servers, databases, etc., and with the internalization and of new skills such as data hosting, Linux infrastructure, data analysis, etc. This is a real commitment from institution, political power at the higher level of the institution with a dedicated budget. I think that a data-driven approach is now a shared and recognized approach. So important work has been done to recognize and theorize this approach. In France, we published a common position of 8 French regulators showing a shared understanding of the topic. Also at the OECD level, as you maybe know, you also the concept as an important part in the work stream around shaping the future of regulator. And in other sectors or parallel sector maybe, we are also starting to implement this data-driven approach for the regulation of for a sustainable digital sector in France. So this is also something that is incumbent to ARCEP, and we will launch in early 2022 an environmental observatory with first indicators around around this key project for the future. In other sectors as well, we also see the emergence of particular notable comparison tools that are using the general principle of the data-driven regulation, with, for example, Yuka, which is an app that allows shoppers to scan the barcode of food to instantly see the impact they have on their health. Or also Open Term Archive that tracks the changes in general condition of big platforms, and you can understand what is now allowed or not authorized on platforms such as TikTok or Facebook or others. So here we saw that the approach is in fact based on data, but what we can also question is what are the results now in 2021. So I want to make you maybe a panorama of what the tools and capability here at ARCEP, because I think that the data-driven approach is really an outcome-focused approach. So we identified 2 objectives. On the first objective, we have now many cartographic tools, and one that I showed you, that Mon Réseau Mobile, but we have the same one for a fixed internet connection called Ma Connexion Internet. We also have other specific tools on maybe on question of interest of the moment on 5G deployment and finishing the 4G deployment also at the departmental level. If we have all these different tools around around maybe the same set of data, is that we try to address all the needs, so whether for citizens but also for local authorities to better understand and plan as well the connectivity deployments in their regions. And of course, we also have the Jean-Laurent Lastelle platform that it's live. The second objective is that we identified is to amplify the regulator's ability to act, notably in a supervisory capacity. So we have public dashboards on purely regulatory programs such as the mobile New Deal in France, and so this is kind of mix internal external, but we also have a lot of internal capacity around our databases, so we can handle some any on-demand analysis from the other regulatory teams here at ARCEP. And we are also able, because we have structured the way we use data here, we can generate automatic reporting where it's needed. And finally, what's the real impact, if there is, on the sector? So over the last 4 years, we saw the investments that grow by 40%. So not to say that there is a clear correlation, but who knows? Of course, there is probably a link to make between these two facts. So regarding also just the numbers, we also receive more than 100,000 alerts from end user and businesses on our platform, Jean-Laurent Lastelle. So And these alerts are also really used. They have a direct impact on on the actors, and we triggered several regulatory action based partly on the alerts. We are also monitoring the development of an access ID API that will be implemented in the end user box CPs boxes and developed by the operators. So, which is a real regulatory tool. Maybe as a conclusion and as an anticipation of some of your questions, here at ARCEP, we consider that regulating with data is way more than transparency. And I hope that is some of the messages that you heard from my presentation, because it is not only soft law, even if it's partly based on it. It's neither deregulation. The goal is really to regulate the actors, and we can see that there is outcome that go in this direction. And we believe that it's a strong tool of regulation, and of course it's based on mandatory decision that rest upon regulated actors. So I hope that the presentation give you an understanding of what is the data-driven approach at ARCEP, and I'm available for your question. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Thank you for this interesting talk, and also for having complied with the time limit. So I will immediately give the floor to Pedro Terrazas from the Instituto Federal de Telecommunications from Mexico, so that he will give his talk, and then we'll have 10 minutes of discussion and questions regarding your two presentations. Okay, so Pedro, the floor is yours for 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Eric. Let me just share the presentation. Perfect. Thank you very much again. Good afternoon in Europe. Greetings from Mexico City. Thank you for the opportunity of being here with all of you and share the IFT experience with the Telecommunications Information Data Bank, which for us, it is a very important tool and process that is paving the way for the IFT to become a fifth generation telecommunications regulator. Sadly, since we do not have enough time to show you the actual product, I am going to focus on some of the main events that have shaped the data bank and its main products. In this sense, let me begin with the presentation and the regulatory framework behind the information data bank.
We just lose your presentation. We just lost your presentation. Okay, thank you.
No, it's okay, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. So, okay, let's move on. So as you can see, these are some of the regulatory landmarks that have defined our data bank. First of all, the 2013 Federal Telecommunications Law, and then the 2014 Organization Act, that both stated the need for telecommunications and broadcasting indicators and the integration of a data bank. And recently, and this is a key event in this brief history, in 2020, the publication of the guidelines for the integration of the statistical compendium, which states that the amount of information that we receive will depend on the level of commercial activity of each operator and the defined telecom services, something that we here in Mexico like to call the rule of proportionality. Going through the next part of the information, let's talk about a little bit about the sources of information. On the supply side, we have 700 telecom indicators that we obtain directly from the operators, and this is the core of the telecommunications information data bank. On the other hand, as you can see, we have the demand side, and in this case, we have service that try to capture the main consumption habits and trends of telecom users. like the annual survey of ICT and internet use, known in Mexico as ENDUTI, a project that is led by the IFT, along with the National Institute of Statistics and the Ministry of Communications. Now, let's talk briefly about the main product, the Information Data Bank, known as BIT in Mexico. This product compiles data from 5 main services in the market: pay TV, fixed and mobile internet access, and fixed and mobile telephony. This information accounts for 120 open format tables with nearly 700 indicators that can be downloaded with just one click. There is also one section where the user can access the main mobile and fixed service markets information and compare it with Mexico's main macroeconomic indicators for a quick and complete context analysis of the telecom industry. In this slide, you can see the official link to the data bank website so that you can explore its contents whenever you see fit. Now, going to the next slide, this is just for reference. Here you can see some of the main events that have taken place over the last 8 years from, let's talk about the creation of the strategic planning coordination to the different versions of the data bank website, going from 40 information tables to over 100 tables, and as I already mentioned, nearly 700 telecommunications and broadcasting indicators. Now, let's talk about a little bit about products, which is something that we do care about a lot. One of the main goals that we have with this information data bank is to strengthen the IFT's regulatory analysis, and we are actually doing it with this product portfolio. Here you can see just a sample of the products that we currently have. As you can see, we go from statistical reports and yearbooks to the calculation of probabilities of ICT use according to income and level of education, among other variables. Moreover, the data bank contains telecom forecasts as well. It is important to mention that all of this information, all of these products that you are seeing right now can be accessed through the data bank, website. Going forward, let's talk about some considerations. As a result, and taking all of this information into account, the Telecommunications Information Data Bank aims to improve the design of public policies for the benefit of the entire population, and of course, the overall decision-making process of the different public and private actors involved in these sectors. Now, how do we do it? Mainly through two factors. The first one is proportionality, as I already mentioned, where the information is requested depending on the operator's commercial size on an annual or a quarterly basis. And the second reason or main factor is by investing nearly 3% of our annual budget on data capabilities. And one of these results is the one that I'm showing you with the Information Data Bank and its main products. Now, as I said before, all of this information and products are helping the IFT to build a better regulatory analysis, which in turn creates a more transparent data integration process, paving the way for regulatory innovation. And before we move into the next steps or what's ahead for this Information Data Bank, just a quick note to wrap up this main idea of how better data capabilities enhance the regulatory innovation process. In the 2020 handbook for the collection of administrative data on telecommunications, the International Telecommunications Union recognizes the data bank as a comprehensive and modular telecommunications and broadcasting data bank based on business intelligence logic. And as our colleague from ARCEP mentioned, we're talking about a very data-driven industry. In fact, telecommunications is one of the three main data-driven industries in the world, along with the cloud services and the financial sector. So power, information means power. So in this sense, it is one of the tasks that we have at the IFT is to share this power of information, just to try and maximize the benefits of having this type of information around the market. So what's ahead? What's next for the data bank? Well, first of all, we are currently in the process of having a full electronic process for the delivery of the information, in which the operators can validate and upload the information into a single platform instead of the manual ongoing process. So we're just trying to have a full electronic process so that the operators can do this in a more efficient way, because right now we're just receiving a CD from the operators, and then that information is uploaded into our entire database. So in this sense, we're just trying to enhance this process by going by having a full electronic process of for the delivery of the information. Also, other upcoming processes are a new version of the website, which would be the version 4.0, and of course, the publication of some specific broadcasting indicators. As of now, the data bank concentrates on telecom services. So we are in the phase of defining which concepts and indicators are going to be uploaded for the broadcasting services and sectors. So in this sense, we're talking about next year to try to define these concepts, these indicators, and then just to have more indicators, a more balanced approach regarding telecommunications and broadcasting services. So this is the information that I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for your time, and I will be ready for any comments or questions when the appropriate time arrives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pedro, both for the information of keeping the time. I remember the participants that they can raise question online, either in the question strand or in the chat. And of course, the panelists can also jump in the conversation. To start the discussion, I have a first question to Pierre Dubreuil regarding one of his slides where he highlighted the wideness and the diversity of the stakeholders in the ecosystem of the data-driven regulation. So in particular, I noticed that there were some academic institute like INRIA, or like which is the French research agency for computer science, and I also noticed the M-Lab, the US M-Lab. So I suppose it's the Media Lab, but I'm not sure. So I just want to ask you what is the type of relationship you have with them? Do you share data at a fine-grained level to develop indicators? What are the issue you are dealing with those academic partners?
Yeah, so MLab is a measurement lab, is a lab in the US. I think it's part from Google, but they have expertise on measuring a network speed on fixed on mobile networks. So yeah, in this co-construction approach, the goal was really to have entire ecosystem working on a problematic that we were not able to tackle ourselves. So on the fixed network side, we used to publish national broadband speeds per ISP based on a lab that we ran internally at ARCEP. And to be fully transparent, at some point we called it the Volkswagen lab, because all the ISPs knew that which were the boxes that we were using, so they were optimizing as much as they could the speed for these boxes that were in the ARCEP lab. So we switched our approach, and our idea was to say, okay, maybe we are not the best actor to measure the internet speed, and maybe some other actors have other ideas on how to do it, and we come out that maybe the best thing was to rely on the private sector that already exists, because when you search on Google and you say internet speed checker, you have plenty of private tools that does it, and they have a dedicated team, and we modestly thought that we could not do better than them, because we had no team dedicated to it, and we wanted to rely on this ecosystem. So the main problematic was that when you measure your speed on the fixed internet, we don't know if your TV is on, if you are watching Netflix on the side, if you have two sons that are playing on their own computers, and there can be a lot of bias in this measurement. So we put all this ecosystem together to see if a solution existed to reduce this bias, or at least to understand what are the characteristics, and to be able to say, okay, here you have some bias, please stop watching TV and make your measurement again, because it will be more representative of the reality. So it was in this context that we worked with all the academics, because they are the one that have worked the most on these topics, and we came out with the idea of an API that is in the boxes of the operator, and that because it's the only level, maybe the simplest, if we can say that this is simple, it's the simplest level where this information is available of other cross usage, other connection, type of connection, etc. And here the academics shared with us all the work they have done on these measurements procedures, and we also shared part of the data we had on this internal lab. And also we share our approaches on the mobile crowdsourcing, because we also, as I explained, we also do some crowdsourcing measurements. And we shared we shared all this data, but it was not a huge amount, but we mostly shared our best practices, and we shared our views. And at the end, it was a convergence on the solution. So I think it was a very good experience, and a very good collective emulation of an ecosystem.
Well, thank you very much. There is another question online that is addressed to you, Pierre, which is about the cooperation with the other regulatory authorities. So the question is, what is this cooperation about, and is it going to be pushed far away in a sense? So is it only exchange of best practices, or is it going further? So the floor is yours.
Yeah, so we in fact exchange a lot with the other regulators. We have different level of interaction, but yeah, to answer in 2 words, yes, we want to be connected regulators, and if we share the same problematic with other regulators, we want to tackle them together. So this is for the big picture. For the details, we have this common group of expertise where we try to identify problematic that are specific to all the sectors, and so we published a common paper on data-driven regulation. We published also more recently another paper on how to design a sustainable digital world through regulation. And we have also more bilateral cooperations, for example, with CSA, so the French media regulator, because of course there is a lot of links between media and telecoms on not only on the frequency topics, but also on the platforms and all this kind of topics. So we have a common group of expertise where we shared also best practices. And finally, maybe at an international level, we also want to spread more this data-driven regulation. So yeah, we are always able to, we are always willing to exchange practices and to show the way we took and the obstacle we already tackled and the one that are on our pace still.
Thank you very much. Now a question to Pedro. Pedro, Mexico is now well recognized for a very active practice of data sharing. So a student of mine, a PhD student of mine, is working on mobility systems in France. But he's also relying a lot on data from Mexico, because there are huge and gorgeous databases provided by public authorities in Mexico. So my question is, so it seems that your strategy is to develop such databases that are fine-grained databases available at a wide scale to various stakeholders. So the question is what are the limits, in fact, of those approach? How do you deal when providing access to databases through API, for instance, API? How do you deal with issues like privacy or sensitive business information? Any take on that?
Thank you, Eric. As you can imagine, it is a good question and quite a difficult one, especially when we talk about sensible information or information that the companies or the industry characterizes as sensitive information. So in that sense, with the guidelines that we have, the guidelines for the integration of for the statistical compendium, we do set what are IFT's rules regarding the publication of the information, the way that we are going to, let's say, publish that information in an aggregate or disaggregate way. So operators actually know how are we going to classify the information. Of course, there are cases where the industry feels that, let's say, information about income or information about gross income might actually become sensitive to them. So in that sense, through the guidelines, the IFT already published that information and is telling the industry this type of information, we are only going to publish that type of information, let's say in an aggregate way. We are talking about aggregate numbers for, let's say, the fixed income market. Okay, so we are not going to publish some specific information per company. So in that sense, everybody knows how we are going to classify that information. Having said that, a huge one of the main let's say risks that and challenges that we have encountered recently is the way the companies do have internally how they manage to get some type of information. Through my presentation, you can I mean the one thing that you can see is that we are trying to build one integrated system. So what we have found over the last 2 years is that in Mexico, there are a number of companies that do not have one integrated system to get information. Let's say they do have this information that it is related to income, to sales department, another information that is related to manufacture areas of the company, and then another area that is related. So we're talking about 2 or 3 or 4 areas inside the company. So they do not have one specific system, yes, to concentrate this type of information. So in this sense, it is one key challenge that, of course, the IFT is taking note so that we can actually have some specific changes in the guidelines so that we can help the companies to try and build that specific information system so that this whole process can become more efficient and easy to use and to share this information. Again, I'm just saying there is power in information. So if there is a way that we can actually build with the industry just to have a more efficient way to do this type of things, we will do it. And that is one of the projects that we have for the upcoming year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro, and thank you, Pierre, for having replied to one of the questions directly in the chat. I'm afraid we have to switch to the next speakers. Now let's switch to the second strand of discussion about the legal foundation on organizational requirements to allow soft legal tools to operate, and will benefit from the experience of Switzerland and Hungary. And so we start with Barbara Wyss from the Federal Electricity Commission ELCOM from Switzerland. And Barbara, the floor is yours for 15 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. I will try to share my presentation with you. Hopefully that does work. Just one small session. Okay.
Yes.
That's it now. Okay, thanks a lot, and sorry for this delay. Good afternoon from my side as well. I am very pleased to be here today also to present the sunshine concept of the Swiss Federal Electricity Commission ELCOM. Now we switch to the electricity and to the soft laws, to say that. Now, what do I have for the next 15 minutes? I want to give you a small or a little overview on the structures and the challenges of the Swiss electricity market. That's just to understand the reason and the motivation we have for the sunshine regulation in Switzerland. I will briefly also discuss the currently used indicators and the grouping of the network operators. And then I would like to say a few words about the current challenges and finally draw a conclusion about the current situation of sunshine in Switzerland. So let's have a look at the structural and regulatory contexts. In Switzerland, we have, unlike other European countries, a regulatory system of cost plus. For the grid tariffs, we do not have an incentive-based system, but cost plus. The most important features are the definition of the total chargeable costs as the actual operating costs plus depreciation and interests on the regulatory asset base. So we really have a cost plus system based on the investments on the regulatory asset base. Then, as you can see here in the picture of the map of Switzerland, we have the real diverse geographical aspects that are also to be met within the regulatory boundaries. We have a highly populated region within the Swiss Midlands, but we have also touristical regions and more rural regions up in the mountains. These situations have naturally some impact on the costs and will have, we show that also an impact of the group on the grouping of the DSOs in Switzerland. We have also major differences within the individual DSOs in Switzerland. In terms of size, but also in terms of regional activity. We have more than 630 DSOs in Switzerland, so that's quite a lot for our small country. And around 250 to 300 of them are very small or smallest enterprises. Now, ELCOM, as a regulator, is Switzerland's independent regulatory authority in the electricity sector. And in order to perform our duties, ELCOM has quite good empowered, or is quite good empowered to pronounce rulings and set up directives. We are also able to examine costs and tariffs and to correct them. The DSO must deliver a lot of data every year concerning tariffs, costs, services, and so on. And these data we collect since 2009. So that's a bit the conceptual frame around our structure. This picture here shows you just or gives you just another overview on the structural data and some facts and figures of our market. Maybe well, just the green bubbles on the right that you see gives you an overview on the size differences of the grid operators in Switzerland. We have 2 DSO that serve a number of bill recipients of over 350,000, and we have most of all DSOs that we have in Switzerland that serve less than 100,000 bill recipients, and many of them even less than 1,000 bill recipients. So that's more or less just to have an idea about the structure of the market and the operators. Now, let's get to the sunshine regulation in Switzerland, the sunshine model. The sunshine concept in Switzerland forms part of the overall regulatory concept of ELCOM. As we do not have, as I said before, an incentive-based regulatory system, but we are cost-based, we miss a broadly applicable way to address efficiency issues. Here, the sunshine regulation is maybe helpful. ELCOM understands sunshine regulation to be a multi-dimensional regulatory approach, which involves the comparison of the distribution grid operators on the basis on several indicators and the publication of these indicators and the results per DSO. It is important that the indicators are simple and comprehensible. They can be easily verified by the DSOs, and this enables also a better communication with the stakeholders of them, such as local councils, the board of directors, or customers. Easily comprehensible indicators also allow the grid operators to identify possible optimization potential. With their sunshine results, grid operators are receive their individual benchmarks on, and this is virtually free of charge. So they have the possibility to advance, to get better. But for this moment, we have just a limited amount of indicators. However, we wanted to reach a stable base to build on. You see here those three indicator types. We have indicators on quality, we have indicators on costs and tariffs, and we have indicators on compliance. There is always the possibility to define more indicators. However, for the moment, we keep simple as we are. The next picture shows you the type of grouping of our DSOs. As the geography has some impact on structure and cost of the grid, we group our DSO in different groups based on the settlement density. So we have here these groups, urban, we have suburbans, we have rural groups, we have mountain regions, and we have a bit as a speciality in certain indicators also touristical regions, because they have a quite a special profile concerning energy consumptions. Now, that is more or less the base of our sunshine regulation. Now, let's get into the challenges. We have quite a regulatory boundary in the moment concerning the publication of our sunshine results. In Switzerland, we have currently no legal base for the publication of the individual results of the network operators from the sunshine regulation. However, we are able to publish since 2009 the tariffs, and what you see here in this picture, that is the website, our new website. I may also inform from the tariffs where consumers have the possibility to compare tariffs either within different regions of Switzerland, different types and different products. So there we already have a small kind of sunshine, but the whole report we are not able to publish for now, because well, the necessary legal base is not given. We have still some data privacy issues, and they are at the moment are parliamentary debates underway, and we hope that we will have these regular legal base for the full publication of our sunshine results within the next hopefully 2 to 3 years. But I have brought some results. We will not go into details concerning these results, but let me just have two facts. We are discussing here the costs, the stability of costs in the last 5 years. As you see, we have 6 rounds or done 6 rounds now of sunshine regulation, whereas the round 1 was a test round. So that means this one we don't take into account when we really compare the results. As you can see, at least the costs here are more or less stable over the years. Well, that's not really a big result, but at least they have not risen a lot. Now we have another result here concerning the tariffs. Also here we see there are not a lot of changes over the last periods that we have done the sunshine regulation. Now, so what are the effects on the sunshine up to now? The most important effect we found out is, or we had, is that grid operators worked hard on the quality on the delivered data. And that was really a big improvement that we don't actually see in the sunshine results for them, but it has had a very big effect, at least on the quality on our data. It is also important, and you see that on this little picture here, that sunshine regulation or the sunshine reporting is only one part in an overall regulatory system that we have here in Switzerland. We base more and more on data analysis also here to identify risk for behavior that is not compliant with the rules and regulation. And so here also sunshine, for the moment at least, forms part of these monitored indicators. Well, what we have to say is actually we have to await the final effects when the publication will be possible. And here I think it is clear that the results will also depend on the communication form and the attractiveness of the publication of the sunshine results. Here we are now preparing the publication, and we base more or less on the steps that we are doing on the publication on the tariffs. The tariffs are published annually with a media communication that leads usually to different newspaper articles, and we think that also the communication of the sunshine reports need to be done in a similar fashion to attract public attention. Well, however, however, we are convinced that sunshine should be seen, as I said, as a part of our overall regulatory framework. And what I think is also important is that we as a regulator are quite strong concerning also our different regulatory possibilities that we have, and we don't need to rely only on the sunshine regulation here in Switzerland. Now, here I have set up some links for further information and reports. Some of them are also available in French. I'm sorry, we are not publishing very many things in English, but however, maybe you find the one or the other information helpful. That brings me to the end of my presentation, and I thank you very much for your attention and for your questions later on.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for this interesting lecture on the practice in Switzerland, which highlighted the synergy existing between the regular activity or the standard activity of regulator, which is gathering data to analyze the operations of operators, and the sunshine approach, which is basically reprocessing part of those data and collecting additional data in order to redistribute the data to various stakeholders. Now let's switch to the presentation by Gábor Kisvárdai from the Energy and Public Utility Regulatory Authority from Hungary. So Gábor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to this panel. I will try to share my presentation in a minute. So the case study or the experience that I'm going to talk about is the Hungarian water regulation, the Hungarian water regulator using soft law tools. And since we are a relatively new regulator regarding the water sector, I think we are at the beginning of realizing our powers and competencies and the length of our competencies and how we can efficiently use soft law tools. And in the beginning of this session, Eric mentioned the trend or the tendency towards independent regulation in Europe, and it's especially true in the world of water regulation. But what we can see now, because we are a member of WAREG, the European Water Network of Regulators, what we can see is that when the independence of these regulators are challenged by any stakeholder, but especially by the government, we tend to touch and use more frequently the soft law tools in these cases. So I am going to give you some examples on these experiences that we have in Hungary. But before I start with that, I would like to just give you a brief information about Hungary. So we are a country of 10 million people. 1/4 of this population actually lives in the capital city and in the suburban areas. The size is 9,300 square kilometers. We have more than 3,000 local governments, so the administration of the country is very fragmented. And we are in the middle of a great water sector reform currently. We managed to aggregate the water companies from 400 into 40 until this day. And I mentioned that we are a relatively new water regulator. We are having this power or these competencies since 2012. So we have 9 years in the making or in the creation of the water sector in Hungary. I consider this as or I consider ourselves as a new water regulator because in the first phase of the water sector reform, we didn't really have the energy or the time and the resources to deal with publications, to be more transparent than we should have been before. Because the licensing process and the aggregation of 400 water companies into 400 took all of our energy and time. But now the situation is different, and you can see on this slide all the stakeholders in the water sector. So it's a fragmented sector. I can imagine in many countries and in many cases it looks like the same. We have 6 ministries dealing with the water services, the water service sector. On the national level, we are an independent regulator since 2013, but we have other competencies for other national agencies in water protection, licensing, water health issues. But what really important about my regulator is that we are independent by law, and we have a separate and independent budget. We have only one responsibility in the Water Sector Act towards the legislation, and it's to publish one annual report to the Parliament every year. I mentioned that we are multi-sector regulator. We we regulate the electricity, natural gas, district heating, drinking water, wastewater, and since 2014, the solid waste market as well. Regarding the water sector, we have many hard powers. So these are all set in the law. These are the hard powers, as I can call it. Maybe one of the most important, and this is where our independency is challenged or questioned, is the power of tariff setting. This is the only power that's divided between the regulator and one of the key ministries. We are only making a tariff recommendation. We are not setting the tariffs. We are not publishing the tariffs. We have to make a recommendation each year to the Ministry of Innovation, and the Ministry of Innovation is not able to publish the tariffs for 9 years now, which is a great problem here in Hungary and the water sector. What I can say, it has only political reasons. In Hungary, we have a campaign on the side of the government for reducing and freezing the household costs. And since this is the case, of course, the new tariffs would be much higher than the population is paying today. The average water price for household consumers in Hungary is around €1, 1.1 euro, which is very, very low. I'm not hearing anybody, but I can imagine the size in front of your computer, because I have just seen a study made by Euro, and the average water price for households in Europe is around 3.5 euros per cubic meter. In Hungary, it's around €1. So we really need a tariff change, but it's not happening. And what we can do in this case as a regulator is we are trying to somehow touch and use soft law tools. I have listed a few which I found interesting. The first, or I can call this number 0 because this is not a soft law tool. I don't know how many regulators have a similar power in Europe, but we have a very, very strong power in the Act. So this is a hard law tool, actually, is that we can recommend any kind of new legislation or amendment of any type of legislation directly to the Parliament in the regulated sectors and in the water sector as well. In the water sector, it works in practice a little bit strangely, because the key ministry is not equipped with the necessary professionals. And in this case, we are the one who actually draft and write the text of these legislation. We send it to the ministry. If they agree with the text, then they send it to the Parliament, and the law becomes adopted. I know it sounds strange, but this is really the case in practice. And what we are using this power is to try to eliminate the lacks of hard law regulation. In what we can see in practice and works in practice, we try to make it to be in the written law. So this is what we are using this, and we have also another hard law instrument, and this is the president of the regulator has the right to issue a decree in certain cases, and especially this is a situation what we can see in Hungary, that in the data collection process we don't have any restrictions in the acts. What we can do is the president issues a decree, and we can set all the necessary data sets in this decree that we want to collect each year, and we can amend these decrees quite easily. Now, going into the way of soft law tools, in 2019 we found that we are collecting too big or too many data, and we are putting a large burden on the operators and the consumers and the local governments as well. So we set up a team within the regulator, and we tried to somehow simplify our data collection strategy, and we found out that 40% of the data collected by us before 2019 was basically unuseful, because there wasn't an objective why we collected this data. So we made a reform, and we eliminated a lot of data sets from our data sheets. And we tried to show the service providers the reasons why we are collecting each sets of data. Actually, they were quite happy about it. We made a lot of conferences and consultations with them. We even had these so-called roadshows where we went to the seats of service providers to go through their registries, their balance sheets, and all the documents to understand how they collect and how they register their own data. It helped us to make this reform, and it's working pretty well, because now we are developing a new software together with the interest group of service providers. So we are trying to help each other in order to make a smooth data collection process for the future. Before 2019, when there was non-compliance on the side of the service providers, we used to apply quite high fines, impose very high fines. We are not doing that anymore. We have very high fines in the Act, defined in the Act, and we could do that anytime, but it's not working, it's not efficient. Now we are trying to understand the reason why they cannot comply with our data requests and try to help them as well. If I want to make or tell you a very extreme example on this, is we are collecting data on utility maps, and we had the map of the whole country except for one territory of a service provider who wasn't able to provide us these data. And we didn't understand it. Why? We wanted to impose a fine, but one of my colleagues actually went to the seat, and we found that they have these drone maps. They didn't have any online maps or electrical maps. So we used our GPS tools, and this professional from my office actually drew the map with his computer. So this is how we managed to finalize the utility map of Hungary, and we gave this data back to this service provider as well. I know it's strange, but this is what we had to do. Regarding publications, we only have two obligations in the Act. The first is the annual report has to be published on our website. The second is every resolution, every decision of the regulator has to be published. Before 2019, these were the only documents that we published on our website. So we found or interpreted the law as a limitation that we have to publish, or we can only publish these two types of documents. After 2019, there was a paradigm shift in the management of the regulator as well, and we found that it's not a limitation, it's actually freedom to publish more and more recommendations, guidelines, besides the annual reports. We could highlight any type of sector interest and make other publications. So what we are doing now is we are asking the service providers and the consumers what they would like to see next year, what they would like to see analyzed by the regulator. And thanks to this power, we are actually making some publications on the capacities of the pipelines. Now, of course, electricity charges are one of the most important. So we made an ad hoc data collection, and we are also making some publications regarding electricity charges in the water regulation and the problems that it's causing for the service providers. I mentioned that we have a quite close contact with the interest group of service providers. We have a memorandum of understanding for a long time now. We are meeting quarterly with them, invite them to our conferences, and they also invite us to their conferences. And in the energy sector, we can see, as we are a multi-sector regulator, that my colleagues on the energy regulation, they are making publications mutually with the interest group of service providers. Maybe this is what we are trying to do in the future, so we are having some talks about this. I mentioned that we have this integrated water utility database. You could see the map of stakeholders in the second or the third slide. Every stakeholder on that map has an access to this database on their different level. The water regulator has the highest access, of course, and we are using this database as a data collection software as well. We are now testing it, and we hope to launch it in the second quarter of 2022. And by the way, this is a EU-funded project. And just to mention the last one, that we are constantly publishing recommendations and guidelines on court decisions, very important court decisions that we have with others or other stakeholders, and legal interpretations of the Act. And I promise this is my last slide. What we found as the result of using soft law tools in the recent or the last 2 or 3 years is that there has to be a balance between the official and unofficial soft law tools. I call official soft law tools those that have a legal background, unofficial those that do not have. In case when there's a shift towards soft law tools, it can undermine the jurisdiction of the government, and it can cause problems to the regulator and the regulated market as well. It happened in the past, so I can tell you this by experience. We have got this criticism from the academia that when we are using too many soft law tools and we are trying to create public policies as regulators, it can turn into the tyranny of regulation. We are trying to avoid that. We are trying to be very careful with that. In case of emerging technologies, soft law is a necessary tool. It's inevitable to use them, and it cannot be prohibited in any case. And of course, it can decrease the transaction cost for the government and the regulated entities as well when they are trying to interpret the law. But what I have found, and I'm a lawyer by profession, is that soft laws are very necessary in many cases, but they can have a higher value if they become hard law rule. So we are using the first power that I mentioned, trying to make new legislation. We are trying to use the soft law rules to somehow shift into hard law rules when practice shows it's necessary. So thank you. That was my presentation.
Thank you very much, Gábor. Your last comments prove that you are actually a real lawyer by training. Thank you so much. I think the two presentations were very interesting, highlighting not only the technical difficulties in implementing sunshine regulation, but the legal boundaries. So soft law tools are not outlaw tools. They have to be authorized by the law and by the legislator, and of course they raise many issues. One of the questions that came to my mind listening to your two presentations is that I had the feeling that in both cases, basically the collection of the gathering of information and the orientation of the publication process, even if it's a forthcoming one in both cases, is really oriented toward, let's say, the traditional activity of regulators: price, tariffs, quality of service. And I have a question about, in fact, the raising, let's say, multiplicity of objectives that are officially or unofficially given to the regulators, thinking in particular of the environmental issues. So I have the feeling that both. So the question to both of you is whether you think or not that gathering data on the way operators are delivering their service is a way also to address other issues, like typically environmental issues, typically the decarbonation of energy, or the increasing environmental quality of sanitation services that always comes with provision of water service. So do you have any take on that?
Well, okay, I'll try. I think one of the boundaries here in Switzerland concerning this question is actually that the Electricity Commission is not really in charge of environmental questions. Sorry, it's a complicated word. So here in Switzerland, we have another federal institute that is doing data collection on these topics, on these issues. It depends on the renewable energies. So there is the Federal Office of the Electricity that does this. Or it depends if it's really concerning environmental issues like pollutions. Then we have the Federal Office of the Environment that is doing analysis like that. We have kind of a information sharing if we have topics that mix together, but otherwise we are not setting up data like that. However, I have always questioned from our DSOs if we want put on our homepage of the tariffs also the green products, because they're like that, they have more information and they're kind of promoting green DSOs. So we are discussing that at the moment, but I think it will be on a later stage.
Thank you. Gábor?
Yes, thank you. In the case of Hungary, the only rule in the legal acts is that the regulator can collect any type or any kind of data which is necessary for completing its tasks, and it's such a general rule, and it doesn't give you too many information or too much information about whether other institutions are collecting the same data, or whether you should ask them about that. And what you have seen, the map, actually what we have found is that we first started to collect so much data, and the reason behind it was that we didn't have anywhere else to turn to, and the regulator didn't have anywhere else to ask for the data except the service providers. So what we did in the first period was to take the biggest picture as possible, but now we are trying to somehow change our vision and take the smallest picture that's necessary to complete our tasks. And can I also maybe answer to the question written in the question section? Yeah, because
yes, of course you can.
there is this question about how can a regulator be accountable internally and externally, and can the annual report to the Parliament be actually considered as a basis for accountability? Currently, in our case, this is the only reporting duty to the legislation. So the law says that we are accountable if every year we make this report, we publish it, and the president has a speech about it in the Parliament. I'm not sure whether it's enough to be accountable internally or externally. That's why we are trying to enhance our accountability towards the consumers and the service providers as well, by publishing, by engaging with them, and I hope that it can somehow enhance our accountability. And we are trying to go in greater depths of transparency as well, not like in the first presentation by publishing all the data, but we are trying to be a little bit more aware of what the public, the consumers, and the service providers done this.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Any take on accountability, the accountability issue?
Well, it depends again on the situations. Like, as I said before, we have quite good instruments here in Switzerland for our work, and we try also to be in contact with consumers. We have also our annual report that we publish for the Parliament, for the media. Also, we have every year a media conference on different topics. I think, yeah. For the moment, I think we have a bit other boundaries, but concerning publication, what we do, and we see forward to the new regulations when we can even more publish even more of our data.
Thank you very much. I think I'm afraid we have to switch to the third panel dedicated to the impact of a richer informational environment on regulatory practices and on operators and users' behaviors. And so we will start with Jean-Laurent Lastelle, with Vice President of the CEER and also member of the College of the CRE, so the French regulator for energy. So Jean-Laurent, thank you for being there, and the floor is yours.
It's nice here. Perfect. Hello, dear friends. A big thank you to the whole team of Dauphine University and OECD for this very exciting invitation and the organization of this very stimulating debate in the middle of this particular economic and productive atmosphere. The speeches of my predecessors were fascinating, and we learned a lot. So thank you very much. I'm Jean-Laurent. Good morning, Eric, from the French Energy Regulator, CRE, and I'm Vice President of the CEER, the Council of European Regulators. The president is Annegret Gröbel, my German colleague and friend. So, discussing today about this issue is indeed a paradox. The world of energy and the world of energy regulation are currently going through a crisis, a very specific moment based on excessive energy prices extremely structuring decisions to be taken on the energy mix. So many debates that COP26 is currently reminding us of. And it is a paradox because it might seem paradoxical to devote a prestigious event to talking about sunshine regulation, which might evoke a regulation that is more incentive-based and more consensual, that one that leads to urgent and structural transformations. But it is not. So you right to organize this event. It is a good decision to organize this symposium in such a moment. It is an excellent idea to organize an event on this theme because the challenges are particularly immense and decisive that the instruments of regulation must change and think about collective support and training. And this is what sunshine regulation can help us with. So today we will start from two experiences of this type of regulation. The CEER experience, the European one, that is to say the Council of European Energy Regulators, that will inspire us an exchange of good practices and benchmarking among European regulators. Then we will come back quickly to France, where I work within the French regulators, to share with you an experience with the French regulators, CRE, the experience of the French Energy Regulatory Commission and the outcomes of soft regulation. So let's go. Like all good methods, let's try a humble definitional effort. Sunshine regulation can be interpreted for us, but we can do a mistake, as soft law tools such as recommendations, guidelines, benchmarking, naming, and shaming used to influence a change in behavior or practice among market participants. Of course, it seems poetic and ambitious. The world of energy regulations, our world, is a world where the exercise of power is traditional. We meet to make decisions which are the result of a public process independent of political power, like Pierre in the beginning of the symposium. We are an independent authority, but whose methods and processes are inspired by the world of public regulation. Decisions, deliberations, votes, negotiations, sanctions, appeals, hearings, verdicts, tariffs, obligations, sanctions. It's not so soft. So, however, the contradiction may only be apparent. Indeed, in France, we are the country of the philosopher Michel Foucault, and we know that power is not only laws, police batons and judges in robes, but also and above all the 1,000 daily influences that structure the field of possibilities of operators, whether they be citizens, philosophers, associations, consumers, or energy networks managers. So sunshine regulation, even if the term is not used in the energy sector, the tools described are in place and in use. We sometimes hear that soft regulation tools could be implemented more easily at the supranational level than at the national level, since institutions, they are driven more by cooperation than by traditional regulations. It's a question. So it is true. Let's start with the Council of European Regulators and an exchange of good practices and benchmarking among European regulators. So a word about energy regulation in Europe. We work very intensively with our European friends in two bodies, CEER, the Council of European Regulator, where we organize, where we promote the consumers' participation to the energy market, proper operation to the retail market, the evolution of the role of the distribution operators, big job, and the exchanges of good practices beyond the European borders. Then we meet in the board of regulators of the agency, the Agency for the Cooperation of Regulators, ARCEP, where a fantastic European administration and my colleagues, regulators, try to deepen the internal market. Finalization and implementation of network codes, improvement of planning capacities within the framework of 10-year plans, an establishment of the European wholesale market surveillance infrastructure, and support for the development of trans-European infrastructures. The Council and the agency are common initiatives, of course, for instance, monitoring of the European energy market, reflections on the future of the internal energy markets called Bridge to 2025, which includes flexibility, very fashionable and very important for the future, and a contribution to the European debate on energy policy. Concerning the Council of European Energy Regulators, the CEER's members and observers are 39 national energy regulatory authorities from across Europe, European Union and broader. CEER supports its members in their responsibilities, sharing experience and developing regulatory capacity and best practices. So we are at the center of the assumption regulation, practically working group meetings, workshops, events, development, and publication of regulatory papers, in-house training academy. The national regulators develop common position papers, advices, and forward-thinking recommendations to improve the electricity and gas markets for the benefit of consumers and businesses. The Council promotes an harmonized regulatory environment and the consistent application of existing European legislation, with a key objective to facilitate the creation of a single, competitive, efficient, and sustainable internal energy market in Europe that works in the consumer interest, and with a wide range of energy regulatory issues, wholesale and retail markets, consumer issues, distribution networks, smart grids, flexibility, sustainability, and international cooperation. So here we are at the heart of the problem. European cooperation exists, it acts on operators, and yet the European institutional order is not traditional. Among the tools for the actions we have just mentioned, there are benchmark and reports with recommendation. But we don't benchmark realized on soft regulation tools used among the members of CEER. Mainly, as regulators, we all use the same tools. CEER's aim is not to act directly with market players. Consistency in the process would suggest that it's the regulators who act on them, and yet cooperation has an effect. So the European regulator aim is not to act directly with market players, it is to study the application of European law in each member state and by each regulator and try to harmonize it. But in this final action, there is also the influence of European soft regulation. The final hard action is inspired by the soft action. Let's take an example of this intellectual challenge. The market monitoring report. We can imagine that monitoring markets and compliance with laws, rules, and recommendations is an important element of regulators' work at national level and, of course, at the European level. The European Council gathers and analyzes data on a range of energy regulatory issues, providing a solid evidence base which can inform wider policy making. So the agency and the Council CEER market monitoring reports consist in 3 volumes: the electricity wholesale market volume, the gas wholesale market volume, of course, and the energy retail and consumer protection volume, identifying relevant best practices to promote competition to the benefit of end consumers. And that is the goal of this work. In these documents, we find, I believe, examples of soft regulation that may be an interest to us today. I will take this example of main findings and recommendations from the energy retail and consumer protection volume of 2021. First, comparison tool websites. Second, supplier for last resort. To protect the consumers, we should ensure that the supplier of last resort is in a place to ensure that consumers always have access to an energy supplier. It's very important nowadays. Third, complete data, of course, very important around the soft regulation. And fourth, smart meters and dynamic contracts. These issues could not have progressed within the traditional regulatory framework. And this is where we find our first observation of the paradoxical effectiveness of soft regulation. It is precisely because the projects are immense, bringing about profound transformations, generating totally different behavior on the part of market players and public players, that the states will ultimately be able to apply the advances that only the tools of soft regulation will have made possible, to make possible to expertly assess, even to make desirable. We can dare this word, desirable. We always want, desire what our neighbor does better than us, of course. Let's take now an example of exchange of good practice, the Regulatory Benchmark Monitoring Working Group, RBN. The report on dynamic regulation shows the state of play of dynamic regulation tools among regulators, regulatory sandbox, pilot projects, pilot regulations, and we talk about this project intensively with MPs, with associations, with consumers to convince them. Knowing the tools used and how to implement them has inspired some states and regulators to implement them as well, and having an effect on market players as well, as these tools allow them to temporarily derogate from the existing legal framework to test and develop innovation. I have heard it said many times that regulation has difficulty with innovation. This is true and this is wrong. It's true because it's always difficult and courageous and ambitious and risky for an institution produced from an old order to produce the fruits of tomorrow's order. Not to confuse this order with better and unknown order, of course. But this is also not true because regulation can adapt according to the objectives it seeks. We don't believe that we need to create the conditions for a particularly attractive, well thought out, best market if our objective is simply to have electricity and to be able to use it without too many interruptions. But our objectives is simply to have electricity and be able to use it without too many interruptions. But our objective does not stop there. Our objective is to offer every European consumer, whether in terms of energy technology or tariff or regulatory efficiency, the best in the world. And this is a question of seeking innovation. However, to achieve innovation is to experience a departure from a regulation, a law, a habit, a certainty, and it means exchanging experiences and good practices. Without the instruments of soft regulation, we would never have succeeded in attempting this service improvement. Once the European level has tried to advance the debate, experiences and ideas through the tools of soft regulations, it's up to the national level, the level of the regulator, to play. Let's look very quickly at that. We have a tool, a French tool, the report on compliance with codes of conduct and independence of network operators. The independence of network operators and compliance with their codes of conduct is a fundamental element of the proper functioning of the markets. And every 2 years, we try to present a report on the compliance of network operators with the obligation under the Energy Code, such as non-discrimination, objectivity, transparency, and the preservation of commercially sensitive information. We will end with two examples of regulation which seem to us to have had the aim of improving the legibility of competition and therefore the functioning of the market, and which have had to use all types of regulations between soft and traditional. So first example of trademark confusion, an article of the code states that the operator of a distribution network shall refrain from any confusion between their corporate identity, their communication practices, and their brand strategy. The objective of non-confusion is, among other things, to enable consumers in the retail market to perceive the distributor and its parent company as two independent and distinct players, and we noted a persistent confusion between ERDF, the distribution operator, and EDF, the historical supplier. In June, 6 years ago, the distributor operator proposed an evolution of the ERDF brand with an action plan. In the summer, the chairman of the CRE referred the matter to the Dispute and Settlement and Sanctions Committee. In January, ERDF announced that it would change its name as the summer to differentiate itself from its parent company. And on May, the distribution operator revealed its new name, Enedis, which is no longer confusing with the brand name used by the historical supplier EDF. The second example was the obligation to separate the distribution operator URM from the historical supplier, but it was more or less the same story. So what can we learn from these two cases of regulation to answer the legibility of competition? We note that it took the threat of sanctions from the institution to embark on a name change, which, according to the regulator, ensures good competition conditions. Perhaps we could have been more persuasive, but in a world where competition ensures that the market functions according to European principles, in a world where the separation of certain activities is part of our European identity and therefore our market identity, in a world where innovation was a priority, the name of an institution, its reputation, are also subject to regulation. So to conclude, let us return to the first paradox and answer the question posed. Our institutions come from a world where formal powers are given to us, and we have seen that we have been able to change, not to deny these formal powers, but to use international European experiences to build platforms, to learn from them, to use new information, to experiment with derogations to formal situations, with the objective of innovation, to search for novelty and the best possible service, innovation without which the energy transition is impossible. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you very much, Jean-Laurent, for this brilliant presentation covering a large set of issues in almost 15 minutes. So thank you so much. And including the quote of Foucault. I liked it very much. And so now I give the floor to James Drummond from the OECD, who will also cover some experimentation that have been made by operators worldwide regarding the use of behavioral insight in the context of policy implementation. So James, the floor is yours.
Just I'll say again, thank you very much for having me here today. It's been a very interesting set of presentations. I've personally learned a lot and I'm excited to be part of it. And today I'm going to speak to you about our work on behavioral insights and how it can be used to improve regulatory outcomes. And I think this fits very nicely with today's theme because on the one hand, a behavioral insights is a set of tools and a method for using different approaches to regulation that often include softer approaches. It can be used in a harder sense as well, but it sort of came to popularity on a more softer law approach. But more broadly than that, regulation in general is about changing behavior. It's about getting someone to do something they're not doing or to stop doing something that they are doing. And to change behavior, you need to understand the drivers and the challenges of behavior as you are making regulatory policies. So as I go through my presentation here, it's based on a lot of work that we've been doing since 2013 through both the Regulatory Policy Committee and the Network of Economic Regulators. I'm going to talk to many of these publications. This is just a slide to give you a place to go look if you want more at the short URL oe.cd/nudge. And to maybe begin my presentation, I just want to set a bit of a baseline. I think many here, given how long Behavioral Insights, or BI for short, you'll often hear me say BI, but given how long it's been around, I think many are aware of it, but just to sort of establish what I mean by it when I talk about BI. And it's really fundamentally about taking a different approach to regulation. It's not about taking an alternative approach. It doesn't challenge the way that we currently do regulation. In fact, it argues it should be part of the current process of doing regulation. And it just helps give a different perspective on the regulatory problem and potential regulatory solutions. And it does so from the behavioral and social sciences and applying these things in public bodies with the aim of making regulations work better. And it does this by using primarily experimentation and observation of human behavior in real life, in real time, and use these findings to inform policies and regulations. And this way we call it an inductive approach to policymaking. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes we approach policymaking through a deductive lens. I'm a political scientist and economist by training. I know at least one panelist is a lawyer. There's probably some engineers in the crowd. And we often take what we've learned through our experiences in these educational domains and apply them to policy problems. And these often work for many of the challenges we're facing, but not always. Sometimes they don't work, or sometimes they don't work for certain people. And what Behavioral Insights does is gives us a tool to understand when and why our models aren't working, and offers a different set of solutions that could be used in collaboration to achieve this policy problem. And the key insight here, and I know we have a slide on this, but I'm just going to have it aligned, is that everybody, each and every person in this world, experiences some level of barriers that makes it difficult to sometimes make a good decision. And our job as policymakers should be to remove these barriers so that people can make good decisions, or at least just not accidentally put them in place as we're making policies. And I think you'll see that through my examples. And so the rest of my presentation will really just sort of go through a number of different ways that this can be used in a sort of a softer approach to regulation, and maybe a way to give you some ideas on how to approach some sort of regulation. And the first example I want to bring up is just really to argue for a bit of a mindset change. And this often, can come into play when you're deciding, do we take a harder or softer approach to the regulatory issue? And one classic example here is the question of can they be trusted? And the they here could be anybody, individuals, firms, whatever. And when the UK Tax Authority looked into this and looked particularly at the specific example of people who don't pay their taxes, people who don't comply with tax law, they found that only 4% of people who didn't pay their taxes were intentionally going out there to break the law and not pay their taxes. The other 96% some level of help, need some level of either information, encouragement, support, advice that would help them pay their taxes. And so in reality, when we're approaching many of these regulatory situations, it's good to keep in mind that, the world is not full of criminals, and it's our job to help people make good decisions. And in doing so, the OECD in 2014 worked with Dr. Pete Lunn out of Ireland to develop a simple sort of set of boxes of behavioral tools that could be used to help people make better decisions through better regulation. And actually the first three there, simplifying information, defaults, and salience are my next three examples. So I won't talk about those here, but I will just highlight debiasing because it's an information issue and more just a general understanding that it's very difficult for people to understand some concepts, particularly non-linear calculations, such as compound interest or liters per kilometers for a car, or exponential growth rates of COVID-19 disease. And so I think we all have seen this in our everyday lives over the last couple of years, and it's another avenue to explore, but I think that's a presentation on its own. But looking first at information, often a softer approach would be just provide more information to people. Maybe the solution here is just give people more information. And the question I pose to you from a behavioral perspective, is that a good thing? Is it good to give more information? The Colombian telecommunications regulator did some research into this, and they were looking particularly at the issue of why people stuck with telecommunications packages that were not necessarily right for them. Either they were in a package that they're paying too much and not using all of the features, or they're paying too little and going over every month and thus paying penalties. These are people that should be switching out into a different package. But why weren't they? We looked at three particular biases that seemed to be at play. One was a fear of regret, that if they chose to change, that they would regret that choice in the longer run. There was a choice overload. There was, I think, something like 50 options that were available to them that included cell phone, internet, and TV, all with technical details. It's a lot of information to process, very, very tough. And this resulted in ultimately a status quo bias. People stuck with what they had as opposed to changing. And when they worked through the numbers, they found that too much information in this situation contributed to people's ability to make good decisions by reducing it by about 10 to 20%, which is an absolutely massive number when you have millions of people buying these packages. And in fact, information is good. We need to be thinking about how we give information, but the best type of information is information that contains the right details. What is the key information that they need to know to make the decision? It's given to them at the right time, at the point of decision making, and not too far in advance when they'll forget about it when they go to make the decision. And then in the right format, easy to read and understand, not highly technical, not highly superficial, but really easy for them to take on and understand. And then moving on to my next example, we can use examples like defaults to see about approach regulatory problems differently with a behavioral lens. I think most of us here in the economic regulation space, we often use the economic market failures models as sort of one of our primary reasons to intervene in the market. And they would look at things like the example on the slide very differently. So this is pre-ticked boxes for insurance. So say you go to buy an airline ticket and they offer you cancellation insurance. Well, it used to be the practice that companies would pre-tick those boxes, pre-tick yes for you. And they did this because they knew that humans tend to often stick with a choice that's pre-chosen for them. On a strictly economic analysis side, this wouldn't make a difference. You take your mouse, you move very little bit, hover over no and click, and you don't choose insurance. There's not an issue here. But when the UK Financial Conduct Authority looked into this, they found that about 1 in 5 people who didn't need the insurance stuck with it, causing about £100 million of extra insurance being purchased every single year. And this just shows one way in which that we can look at issues that traditionally might not be issues for us and look at it differently with a regulatory lens that uses a sort of a behavioral approach. And then on my third sort of example from that rubric I showed on salience, really, if you want to get people to do something, you really need to make it very clear what is the thing you want them to do. This is some work that we did in the context of a big project on safety culture with Canada, Ireland, Mexico, and Oman. And this is working directly with Ireland and an issue they're having with registered gas installers reacting to non-conformity notices. And this is the standard notice that they would receive. It's a very bland message. It's not addressed to anybody. Dear registered gas installers, it's a very generic opening. There's nothing special about this letter that draws my attention. You might get a lot of bills and letters every single day. How do I know to pay attention to this as opposed to another advertisement I might get? It contains a lot of legal text, it's very heavy, doesn't make very clear what you want me to do with this letter. It's very hard to act on a letter like this. So we tested a behaviorally informed non-conformity notice with them, where we put a big red box at the top, which is universal language for stop and pay attention, put an exclamation point for you really need to pay attention to this. We addressed it to the person, in this case, a fictional James Joyce. We highlighted some of the key parts of that text that really draws their attention in, and included a box that had them plan what they were going to do to resolve this issue by what date, and then send that back to the regulator. There's really interesting results here because for registered gas installers that were inside firms, they were 13 percentage points more likely to resolve their non-conformance issue in a timely fashion, which is great. But for individuals that worked alone, they actually had worse rates in response to these notices by about an equal margin, about 14 percentage point reduction. And this comes back to what I said before about the inductive approach. If we had just blanket chose this solution, we would have said, okay, well, from a deductive perspective, behaviorally informed notices are great. But when we go test it, we find that it works for some groups and not others. And that's a very important insight as we approach the regulatory problem. And then moving out of that model I showed you, and just two final examples of sort of more intersecting issues that I think might be important. One is the understanding that not everyone sees the problem the same way. And this might be, again, quite obvious from an interpersonal standpoint, but as a regulator, it's a very important insight about not having sort of blanket solutions to problems. And this, again, comes from our safety culture work. And this time, the survey that we distributed to firms in the regulated sectors in Canada, Ireland, Mexico, and Oman. These are energy firms, excuse me. And we asked them, what is your perception of safety in your workplace? And it's almost a staircase. The further you are away from the problem, the higher your perception of safety in your own workplace, which makes some sense. Those who are close to the problem see the problem. And actually what's not on the slide, but regulators had an even lower perception than other frontline workers. And yet regulators are often speaking directly to senior managers or kind of senior people in the company anyway. And that difference in perception might impact the way that things like transparency and information is communicated and is absorbed. And thus arguing that we might need to think about different ways of approaching these companies. And then finally, I've been speaking this entire time about improving outcomes in the sector, but what about in ourselves? What about in the institutions, the tools, and the processes of regulatory policymaking? And this is really hot off the press. We released it last week. It's a paper that we did on mapping the ways that behavioral insights could inform the governance of regulation. And it runs off my initial premise in my first definition slide of everyone experiences behavioral barriers. This includes us. Government is created and run by humans, and we experience the same biases and barriers as anybody else in society. And thus, we should be really discovering ways that BI could be applied to the work that we do to make it run a little bit better. And just topical to this conversation, because you guys talk about transparency, we actually address this in a very sort of high-level way as more of a kind of a searching sort of discussion piece. But while the importance of increased transparency is strongly established, we do not argue against transparency, it does come with some potentially unintended side effects of increased level of scrutiny of the regulator and those who work in the regulator. And this could amplify biases such as anti-public sector bias or potentially loss or risk aversion in the individuals. And we provide some potential solutions that might come in the form of conducting transparency earlier in the process when the decision is less baked and people are less likely to feel a loss or a risk about talking about it, and maybe have more of a willingness to adopt different approaches. Or maybe even impose structural solutions that take the decision to do such things out of people's hands that might cause inaction, such as automatically triggering ex post reviews that might be a bit controversial. But again, all this really needs to be investigated and tested further. It was very much a scoping paper, and I presented here as sort of an idea for to discuss it further with anybody who wants to. So final concluding remarks, my three sort of takeaways is really about choosing the right tool for the job. BI provides a number of different ways that regulators can use it to help improve outcomes, especially related to softer approaches like providing information the right way and improving transparency. But location really does matter. You need to be testing these solutions in your own situation to understand what works and what doesn't. And understand that it's ultimately not a silver bullet. It's not a cure-all. It's not going to solve all your problems. It's an important part of the solution. It's a different way to look at things, but it needs to be used as part of a holistic policy process. So that's my presentation. Again, I remind you that the short URL, if you want to go see the work, is oe.cv/nuds. And of course, please get in contact or let me know any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, James, for your presentation, and thank you also, Jean-Laurent, for your talk. I'm afraid we are running a bit out of time, so we'll have a very short time for questions. One question I have to both of you, based on your two presentations, in a sense, is that my experience is that regulators, typically board members of regulatory authority, and their correspondent in the industry. They are highly skilled people. They invest a lot in examining the various issues related to regulations, the various dimensions of regulation, etc. So I have the feeling that those guys are not those who should be targeted by behavioral tools, but rather, in fact, those who should be targeted with behavioral tools are the policy decision makers, the legislators in particular. They need focused and simplified information to make decisions. First, because they don't have time to investigate all the issues they are legislating over, and also because they need what James suggests with his approach, some way to focus their attention on essential dimensions. So, don't you think this should be well, the behavioral insight that you were covering, James, should be targeted to legislators in particular, policymakers broadly speaking, of course to the public opinion, etc. But those who impact on the mandate of the regulators. And the question is also to Jean-Laurent, who probably has also a lot of experience about that asymmetry of knowledge and information that is not only between the regulator and the regulated firms, but between the regulated firms, the regulator, and the policymakers, let's say, to make it short.
Sure, it's a very good question, and I would argue that I think the lessons we learn from behavioral insights is that it should be mainstreamed as part of everything we do. It's not an approach on its own. It's not something that you use in lieu of something else, but it's something that helps everyone as every part of your life. Indeed, as you're saying, when you're trying to communicate both upwards and downwards, upwards to your decision makers and downwards to the regulated sectors, those in the regulated sectors, taking an approach that simplifies information and makes it very clear what you want people to do and why is kind of very, very rudimentary behavioral insights, kind of one of the very, very basic tenets of behavioral insights. But just to take the premise of your question on a little bit, in the paper, we actually explored this a bit about the role of expertise inside of policymaking. And one of the things that we do discuss there is that expertise can impart its own biases into the process itself. One, there could be an overconfidence in your own analysis and your own perspective, that you know so much about this problem that or not you, but the people who are working on the problem know so much about this that there's no other solution other than the one you're thinking of. So having that diversity in terms of thinking inside the regulator is very valuable, to think of different ways of approaching the problem. And also kind of that goes into sort of a bit of a groupthink issue, that if you have too many people with the same ideas and the same high level of those ideas around the same table, they could just sort of put the blinders on and not think about other solutions. So I would agree very much with your question, but also I would also push back a little bit on the premise, just a little bit from the paper.
Yeah. There is a thin line between behavioral insight and manipulation. I agree with you. Jean-Laurent.
Yes, you're right. Concerning MPs and political authorities, we are lucky on the field of energy, because the MPs, the senators who are interested in energy are not highly publicized. So they lack the substance of the problems, and they can accept really a large scale of ideas, innovations, and time of discussion, of course. The regulators and the correspondents are great experts, terribly rigorous, that is true, and they are very challenged by the environment. And we founded in CRE, the French regulator, a prospective committee 4 years ago, and to realize that your desire, because the regulator has nothing to sell. unlike many other players, and can get everyone around the table and make progress in the work of innovation, conviction, appropriation. And it is soft regulation that is making this possible more and more today. Because you're right, putting everyone around the table is very recent in our jobs. It's weird, it's original for us. And that's what regulation is. It's accepting, soft regulation is. It's accepting to discuss with other trades, other jobs, other ideas, therefore other possible solutions. And it was very new.
Thank you so much to both of you. I'm afraid we have to stop the last roundtable there and to give the floor to Anna. So Anna, my deep apologies for letting you so much so little time to draw your conclusion, but you still have time. You have 10 minutes if you need it, if you need them. I think the audience will stay with us in any case, and in any case we are recording the session so that the session will be available to all. So Anna, the floor is yours for the concluding comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. Thank you very much to you for the invitation and the entire team at Dauphine for organizing this event. It's a pleasure to have this traditional seminar always linked to the meeting of the Network of Economic Regulators that is starting tomorrow, taking place tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So I'll be very brief, and I also want to join everyone who has spoken before me to congratulate the panelists. I think we've really had excellent, very high quality presentations covering a very wide universe of approaches. So I don't think that I will attempt to summarize everything that we've heard. Rather, I think I'll come back to basics, making just three main comments. And my first one is linked to something that we heard from one of the panelists. I think it was Pedro from IFT Mexico, who said information is power. And we all know this, information is power. So I think this begs the question of why collect information? What purpose does the collection of information serve? So we heard from Eric in the opening remarks that obviously we are looking to bridge information asymmetries. We're looking to tackle market failures. Barbara gave us some examples of how this is taking place in Switzerland, for example, where data is informing regulatory decision making. But beyond the traditional functions of the regulator itself, of course, one of the important purposes of data and information sharing is to inform stakeholders outside of the regulator. So we heard about supporting consumers making informed decisions, for example, on which operator is best for them in their personal context to select as their service provider, but also using data-driven regulation. We heard from ARCEP that there are opportunities to go even beyond just supporting informed decision-making and really empowering consumers to come on board into co-creation and acting as mini regulators, I think Pierre said, also providing data to the regulator on quality of services. Beyond consumers, I would also like to highlight another group, an important group of stakeholders for regulators, where I think data sharing should not be ignored, and the importance of data sharing by regulators should not be ignored, is government and public administration. Obviously, the sectors where economic regulators intervene are very complex. There are a number of public actors intervening in these sectors, and economic regulators are really actors who have their fingers on the pulse of the market. And they are empowered to collect a lot of data from operators. Therefore, they can truly contribute to public policy goals, monitoring of whether these policy goals are being achieved by government by transparently sharing some of the data that they collect from markets. So these are some of the answers that I heard in today's seminar to the answer to the question of why collect information. And I want to highlight that it's very important to ask this question. I think Gábor mentioned the risk of regulatory tyranny. So it is important to keep in mind one of the key principles of regulatory policy, which is proportionality, when we're thinking about data collection. So therefore start with what is the purpose that we want to serve? What is the data that we need for this information to be relevant and useful for our stakeholders, and not go beyond this and not create unnecessary burden on industry. The second point that I wanted to make is about the fact that obviously data collection, data processing and data sharing is one of the core functions of any economic regulator. And it therefore needs to be the subject of a very deliberate institutional strategy. This strategy needs to be resourced. We need to make sure that there are adequate competencies to implement this strategy, especially as we're moving to data-driven regulation. I think we heard from the interventions today that there is certainly need for there to be a mix of hard and soft approaches with regard to data collection and processing and sharing. I think it depends very much on context and culture also, in which cases a soft approach might work better than a hard approach. And I don't think that there is any one right answer for any regulator on whether to use soft or hard approaches. But I do think that softer approaches will allow for more agility and more experimentation in the work of the regulator, in particular if we're talking about behaviorally informed interventions, as James was sharing with us. And importantly, whichever tool is chosen, whether it is a hard law or a soft law approach, a regulator needs to be transparent that it is making this choice, and it has to disclose what it is doing. And this, of course, also goes to, for example, some of the ethical considerations of using behaviorally informed strategies. And my last point, and anyone who's been at a meeting of the NER will not be surprised that I'm making this point, it's that obviously in the regulatory regime, the sun should shine on every single actor. And this involves also the regulatory agencies themselves. The data that we have at the OECD from the indicators on the governance of sector regulators that Eric was referring to at the beginning of the seminar show that regulators are very good at sharing data on the performance of the sector. They're a bit more shy when it comes to sharing data on their own performance. And this is a very good bridge, I think, to close the seminar of today. This will be one of the items of discussion that we have at the Network of Economic Regulators from tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing many of you there tomorrow. Thank you very much again, Eric, and congratulations again to all of the speakers. I've really enjoyed following the discussion today.
Well, thank you very much, Hannah, for this brilliant conclusion, and looking forward to the discussion starting tomorrow at the NER meeting. And thank you to the audience. Thank you to those who were involved in the organization of this meeting, both on the chair side and on the OECD side. And looking forward to our next discussion within 6 months at the next OECD joint OECD chair, governance and regulation chair meeting. I'm afraid we'll be still online given the evolution of the situation, but hopefully in November next year we'll be all in Paris for the next edition of our joint meeting. So thank you so much, and talk to you soon in other contexts. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.